Hi, and welcome to our DM Tips and Tools series for new DMs wanting to get involved with D&D or role-playing in general. I'm Gavin, and I'll be walking you through the next 10 minutes. Our topic today is really 10 questions to ask yourself when you're looking to write a module. So let's jump into it. First question to ask really is whether or not you're going to use your own world to set this in, a commercial world, or not bother at all. We'll do another video on world building as such and what you need to do to sort of flesh that out. But it's material in asking the question because really it provides your players a bit of background about how they're going to interact. So you can just assume that everything in your world where this is set operates exactly the same way as normal. So normal time, normal days, single moon, all of those. If you stray from that, effectively you have to give your players a little bit of detail about how things work, what gods are worshipped there, how the government works, and all of those sorts of things. So it's fairly important to think about those sorts of things as you start. So question 2, are you doing a one-shot or are you doing a campaign style or a combination of both? So generally we call one-shots a game which can be finished in a night. I tend to write one-shots with the aim of sort of finishing it up in about 3.5 hours. But it really depends on your gaming group and how long you really want to run that for. Can be shorter, can be longer. The difference between that and, say, a campaign game is really with the one-shots you have a defined end. You have an outcome which you get to at the end of the session, providing some closure for the party, whereas a campaign could keep running on. You'll stop at a logical point, but things may be happening still as you move forward. A combination of two is you write a series of one-shots spaced with the same characters, but with an outcome at each end. So that's kind of a bit of a hybrid model. So really, you just got to think about how that happens. Question 3 is really who are you playing with? Fundamentally, if you're playing with your own friends and you've been playing with them for a while, you kind of know how they like to run, the style they like to play, how long they take doing encounters. Whereas I think if you're looking to play with a new group or say, for example, a convention module or things like that, you have to be a little bit more circumspect. Sometimes you have to write a little bit more because you're not sure whether or not people are going to run through your material too quickly or too slowly. So you have to be a little bit flexible with that. Question 4 is really how long do you want it to run? And this is a two-part question, really. It's like, for example, when we sort of talked about one-shots, do you want your one-shot to run for 3 hours? Do you want it to run for 4 hours or 2 hours? If you're running a campaign, have you got an end state in mind, and have you got how long do you think, or how many sessions the players would take to complete this? So you kind of need to think about that, and also that then leads into what you write. So I tend to be a little bit formal about how I write one-shots, and I type them up, and we'll sort of go into why you would want to do that. But I know that with my regular gaming group, we would generally go through about, say, 6 to 8 pages of encounters, both role-playing, puzzle, and, say, for example, combat encounters in a session. So that would take up about 3 hours of play with time for interaction and everything else. If you get to that point with your group, it's really great because then you can sort of plan things out a little bit better, understand how much you need to write and what you need to write for your gaming group. Question 5, what's the idea for your game? What's the premise that you're actually writing about? It's the key to the story. And there's some fairly standard tropes. You could sort of think about a heist scenario if you're doing a one-shot. Similarly, rescues, treasure hunts, dungeon crawls, investigation. You can go through all of those, and a combination of those over time is a really, really good thing. Next question is kind of important when it ties things together. Why are you writing this? Are you writing it for reuse or publication? And straight off, that will tell you how formal you need to get with your writing. Why? Because if you do something formal, you can, as in, for example, you sort of type it up and have it as a document. You can sort of cut and paste things and repeat things, like whether it be monster stat blocks, whether it be text blocks which you read out to your players. but also then when you're going on and writing other stuff, you could reuse that content. Um, if you're playing with your normal playgroup, you could just write handwritten notes, and sort of anywhere really in between. My rule of thumb is the less formal your presentation is, the more you're going to have to improvise with your players through the game. Not a bad thing, especially like I said, if you're playing with your local playgroup, that's not a problem at all. But something to think about. The more work you kind of do up front, defining things like what NPCs will say, what monsters you'll face, etc., will make it easier when you're actually running it through. And sometimes when you're running it through for multiple groups or different people, it does become a little bit easier when you have that work done up front. Question 7, what's your framework? So I like having a framework when I write up stuff. And what do I mean by that? Really, it's about storyboarding. So if you have a look at how many creative people who are doing animated films, series, whatever, they have a series of scenes in their mind and they sort of run through what that would look like. And that's kind of the way I like to develop my stories. So I'll have an idea of what I want the characters to do, the initial premise, and then kind of the end state. And then you start to think about, well, what's going to happen in between? How are they either going to get the information they need to solve something if it's an investigative style? Where do they need to go through if it's a treasure hunt to get to the end point? And what makes sense from an encounter perspective in between? And really, again, depending on your group's play style, I like to sort of combine a multitude of different encounters. So, you go through the standard role-playing encounters where they're talking to NPCs, maybe getting a level of information, doing that sort of investigative type work. You then have the classical puzzles. You solve a puzzle to sort of get through to the next stage of something, or it's an implied puzzle that they need to solve to get to the next step. And lastly, of course, you've got your monster encounters or your stat block encounters with opponents, and that's the rolling dice type stuff, etc. Ultimately, it's up to your play style. Like we tend to be more collaborative storytelling, so we kind of have a mix of all of those sorts of things. Some play groups tend to be much more in the way of combat oriented and very much into the mechanics of that. It really, all of them really are great. It really depends on what you want to do and what your players want to get out of things. So there's no right or wrong with that. Just have a think about whether you sort of lean to one side than the other or have a mix of things, because also those things do take a different level of time in terms of planning and timing those encounters. Now, here's an interesting question which we often don't talk about, is whether or not you actually supply pre-generated characters or you get players to roll up their own. Normally, if you have a session 0, you'd sort of lay the groundwork for what your expectations are for people, and what your expectations for the game are, and to create some characters. We tend to play with a group which is very familiar with each other. We've been playing for decades. So we tend not to really focus a lot on a session 0. And part of the efficiencies, if I can put it that way, of actually playing is you can invite them along. If you've got some pre-gen characters, you generate as many as you need, or maybe even a few more. Give people the option of what they want to play, and then basically they can pick that up. They're familiar with it, they read enough of it, and you can jump straight into play. The other benefit of pre-gen characters is you can sort of write their backgrounds into your story, and that makes it a little bit easier than having characters created and then having to sort of retrofit them in. But again, ultimately, it is absolutely up to your playgroup and what you want to do. And you can have a combination of both. Sometimes you can have some pre-gen characters to allow people to sort of pick stuff up and run quickly if they're not interested. But you might have players who are absolutely desperate to play a particular type of character. And yeah, let them roll it up and away you go. There's no, again, right or wrong with that. How are you going to provide flavour? Now, this is an interesting topic because it sort of covers a number of different things. There are some things that you almost certainly need to do, which is like, for example, in D&D, maps, floor plans, those sorts of things. Now, again, can go from a hand-drawn thing to quite an elaborate isometric type drawing. I tend to use tools which are available online, and if you do a quick Google search on dungeon mappers or map making software. You can find a multitude of them, which are very good and fit for purpose. I've actually subscribed to a couple of different tools for map making and things like that, because I think it provides a lot of flavour when you can generate really good maps and things for your stories. And I'm a terrible artist, so that's the other part of that too. Speaking of being a terrible artist, I also like to generate some pictures, whether it be landscape, whether it be portraits of NPCs, etc., to add some flavour to my games. Now, I have, as I've just said before, a terrible artist. So you can actually use AI generated art to do some of this, and any of the functions based on stable diffusion or things like that certainly provide a great basis for those sorts of things. Now, what I would say is that if you are writing for publication or you're planning to sell this, please pay for an artist. You know, they develop all of these things, and really they deserve our support. Unfortunately, like I said, I do this for free, and I have zero skills, so please forgive me for that. So, but think about those sorts of things. Lastly, are you focused on having fun? It's probably the most important thing. We only do this to have fun. Very few people make a profession out of this, unless you're Matt Mercer in Critical Role, and they're fantastic. But most of us do it for the fun and time with friends, etc. So understand what it is that your players want to get out of the game. Understand what it is that you enjoy. If, like I said, we tend to be more on the lines of collaborative storytelling, so we like to evolve the story as we're going. Others, you might want a heavy combat type approach. You're not really invested in your characters, but you're invested in the mechanics of the story, and you're there for that. And in those cases, sometimes you might get a total party kill. But if that's the type of game that you want to play, go ahead, have fun, and do stuff. So anyway, in summary, I hope these points have helped. And remember, if you and your friends are enjoying it, don't worry about any of the rules or anything else. Don't worry about even the suggestions here or the questions. So just have some fun, enjoy yourselves, and we'll keep a watch out for other items here in the series. So I'm Gavin. Have fun.